Oh, Canada. Are you guys gonna surrender, throw up the white flag, and just join the US, become the 51st state? It would be pretty comfortable for you, right? It's like part of your cultural heritage to give up, to surrender. It's very French-like. Too far? Sorry. But seriously, it would kind of make sense if you became part of the US. The US would gain an extremely resource-rich part of the world, and Canada would become part of the most powerful economy in the world. Canadians overall would benefit immensely, and the US would gain energy independence. They already have it, but they would gain even more independence by having access to an enormous amount of land. I feel like it's a win-win. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but Canada does have a pretty big problem, and if it's not addressed pretty soon, it's going to get much worse. And that's what I'm going to talk about right now. I'm also going to talk about why investors are avoiding Canada and what may make them go back into Canada. So first, let's talk about immigration. I've already offended most of you. I'm going to offend you even more. So Canada's immigration trend has been pretty wild. Since 2015, immigration has increased tremendously, and this has been under Justin Trudeau. There's actually a chart going around that shows the GDP per capita under Trudeau pretty much flatlining since he took office. And this highly correlates to the immigration. What that means is that more people have come into Canada and the GDP has not risen significantly, which means that GDP per capita is actually flatlined. So today in 2024, GDP per capita in Canada is about 53,000 US dollars per person. In 2011, 13 years ago, it was about 52,000 US dollars per person. So it's pretty much flatlined this entire time. And that's gotta be really frustrating if you're a Canadian in Canada looking down at the US and seeing the US GDP per capita or the US quality of life increase while yours is just not moving at all. And a big reason for this is this immigration story. So once Trudeau took office, he pretty much opened the floodgates for immigrants. Now from early 2000s till about 2015, there's about 250,000 people per year coming into Canada. From 2015 onwards, this has risen. And today in 2024, it's about 500,000 people per year. And for this year, 2024, the top 10 countries where immigrants came from are, number 1 is India, number 2 is the Philippines, number 3 is China, number 4 is Nigeria, number 5 is Cameroon, number 6 is Afghanistan, number 7 is Eritrea, number 8 is Iran, number 9 is Pakistan, and number 10 is France. So that list of countries that I just named are people coming from around the world to Canada, and I'm very pro-immigration actually. Personally, I think that being able to immigrate to a better opportunity, to going to where you're treated best, to going to improve the quality of life is something anybody should try and strive to do. The problem though is that you have a lot of people coming into Canada that have completely different views on religion, on culture, on how economies work, on how their lifestyle should be, and this is very difficult for the Canadian economy to adapt to equalize. So the assumption is that people are saying, oh, GDP per capita in Canada is low, but it will increase once these immigrants get integrated into the Canadian economy. The problem though is that many of these people immigrating into Canada are coming into a Canadian system that doesn't necessarily foster entrepreneurship. In fact, it actually stifles it. In contrast to the US, where you have immigrants come to the US, build companies, get wealthy, and grow, Canada is kind of doing the opposite. And the best way to show this is that the GDP of Canada, 40% of it comes from government jobs and government programs, which means that only 60% of the Canadian economy's GDP is actually driven by the private sector. Now you may think, oh, that isn't that high. What is it in Russia, or what is it in China? What is it in a country that is a communist dictatorship? Well, it's a lot lower. In fact, Canada is one of the highest in the world. It's lower in the US, it's lower in Australia, it's lower in the UK, it's lower in Russia, it's lower in China. Everywhere else, it's lower, meaning the amount of GDP derived from the private sector in all those countries I just listed is much higher than Canada. Canada is relying too much on their government to actually stimulate their economy. You look at real estate prices in Canada and say, what's going on? The economy must be doing well. That's more of a facade than anything, because you have money coming from outside, coming from China, coming from Asia, buying real estate, propping up super high property prices. Additionally, the Canadian government is artificially pumping these property prices with programs that incentivize higher prices. And you have an economy that's not really natural, it's not really growing on its own, it's not supported by the private sector, and it's not integrating these immigrants into that private-driven economy. So the Canadian economy overall is not healthy, and the future outlook for it is not good. That's why you see investors avoiding in Canada. The PE of Canada, meaning the valuation of Canada right now, is about half of the US. So investors are seeing much more growth potential in the US than Canada. How can that be? These two countries have the same language, they have a border right next to each other, they're the #1 trade partners back and forth. How could Canada be so much cheaper than the US? And the answer is that investors see much less growth opportunity with Canada than they do with the US. And again, a big reason for that is because you have a super high amount of immigrants coming into Canada that aren't being integrated into the economy. In fact, they're living off government programs. They're living off government jobs. They're not building new companies. They're not bringing innovation. And this is stagnating Canada's economy. That's why GDP per capita has pretty much flatlined. Even the gross GDP is pretty much stalling out. You have a growth rate, a GDP growth rate of less than 1%. And going forward, it's probably not going to go any higher. So for investors, you probably want to avoid Canada right now. Or if you think this is the bottom, if you think it can't get much worse than Canada, maybe now's the time to start investing. I will say, if the government changes significantly in Canada, there is an opportunity for Canada to have a boom. There's a lot of natural resources there, and if Canada can change the trajectory that they're on, the Canadian economy could boom. I still think they'll have a lot of problems with the society themselves, but we will see what happens. All right, guys, it's getting dark out here, and I gotta go in before the monsters come out. See ya.